Hello and welcome to Behind the Headlines with Legal Insurrection. We have your updates for the week of July 8th, or the news week of July 8th. In this episode, we're going to talk about a handful of things, including Biden's press conference that we just listened to tonight, Hollywood getting involved in the electoral process, Kamala Harris 2024, and much more. My name is Kimberly Kay, and I'm the Editorial and Operations Director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our President and Founder, Professor Bill Jacobson. So let's go ahead and jump in. So thank you all for joining us tonight. If you are watching and not listening, I want to apologize. We were directly in the path of Hurricane Beryl, and so I have been working outside all day long, and I did the best I could. So please forgive me. But first thing I want to jump into tonight is the press conference that we just heard. So I have many thoughts about this. I definitely don't think this was a shining moment for President Biden and his big boy conference. But Professor Jacobson, before I jump into some questions that I have for you, do you have any overall thoughts of how that went, and what you think the ramifications might be, positive or negative, for Biden and his campaign?
Well, I think one impression that I had was how controlled it was. That while it was a press conference, he announced at the start he's been given a list of people to call on. And that's how he's always done it. So they are very controlling, even in public. And the people they called on, up until the very end, asked totally softball questions. In fact, one of them went to, I think it was a Polish reporter who obviously hates Donald Trump, okay, because he asked Joe Biden, will you please save us from Donald Trump? So they called on him. They had to know that he's a Trump hater. Then they call on some guy from the New York Times who asked 3 or 4 questions, multiple follow-ups about Chinese-Russian relations. And that ate up 8 to 10 minutes. So this was, people, like to mock Joe Biden, but the Biden campaign and the Democrats, they are extremely controlling. Whether that works for them or not, we'll see. And then they limited the number of questions. And at the end, when reporters started shouting questions, they hustled them off the stage. They announced it's over. We're leaving, basically. So, I mean, that's really, there's substantive things, there's electoral things, but people should not underestimate how controlling and manipulative the Democratic campaigns are. This is classic of how they do it for Biden, in contrast to Trump, who would show up at these press conferences and love to brawl with the reporters. They're not going to let Biden do it. They didn't let him do it in 2020, and they're not going to let him do it in 2024.
I mean, and Trump is the perfect example of completely unscripted. I don't think he ever shows up with anything in mind necessarily, other than to just, give people a hard time and or the press the hard time. Anyway, so I think you make a great point about the Democrats being incredibly controlling, because it's something that I've thought about and just kind of trying to figure out what the game plan is here. I know we talked about this in the first episode, but it's what exactly is going on behind the scenes, whether or not they actually thought that they could trot Biden out and people would buy this despite his obvious cognitive decline, just because he can say he beat Trump in 2020, or whether or not, I think that's a very likely answer. And I know that it's definitely possible. It's starting to look like, though, at least to me, it's starting to look like they know there's no good way to get rid of him that's not going to cause major damage to the Democrat brand. And it's starting to look like, to me, like they're letting him flounder a little bit to trot him out, give him a lot more airtime to show people how bad the situation is, just so they can start bringing other people in to say, well, he really needs to go, so that all these calls make it look like it's an outside effort as opposed to an internal effort to displace him. And so that's at least kind of my thought process as I'm watching all of this take shape. And also, the Democrats do have a bench. They have a lot of young whippersnappers that would easily, like, readily jump into leadership positions, whether or not that's the presidency. But I think going back to the point you made about them being controlling, the younger crop are true progressives. They're not Democrats. They are progressives, which is what the progressive Democrats ended up breeding within the party. And I don't think that they would risk putting the AOCs or crew members in a place where they were not controllable, like completely 100% controllable.
Well, one thing that's going to come out of this tonight is in many ways it was the worst of all worlds for the Democrats. That Joe Biden was defiant, as he has been. He's going to stay in. He didn't completely close the door. He said the only way he would drop out is if people were to show him data showing he can't win. And I don't know that that exists. It certainly doesn't exist in the public polling. The public polling shows him down, but it's July. It's not, 3 days before the election. So he's not convinced he's going to lose. But I think the Democrats know something we don't know because they are terrified. The various senators and congressmen have said their internal polling shows disaster. I don't think you would have the Team Obama getting involved. And everybody assumes, George Clooney and all those are put up to it by Obama people. And there's been some reporting that Team Biden is blaming Obama for this predicament. But they wouldn't be doing that unless their internal polling was completely disastrous, unless their focus groups were completely disastrous. And that's a weird disconnect here. But, Trump's the winner because the chaos continues. That was my hot take right afterwards. We're in for at least days, maybe weeks of chaos in the Democrat Party. And so Trump must be happy about that.
I think it's going to be a great fight because if it's obvious that they're going to start canning him, and it kind of looks that way. I think a huge indicator to me is the fact that now they're trotting out Hollywood and getting them involved, because anyone cares what Hollywood thinks about who we should elect. But I think the fact that they're reaching into more of the cultural zones to get people to call for Biden to step down, I don't believe that's organic. I believe someone reached out to him. I do love that Biden is questioning polling data and polling accuracy publicly. That was probably my favorite part of the whole press conference. There were a handful, but I thought that was pretty tasty.
Well, I think Hollywood figures parting with Biden, I think, is very important. Not important for you and me, okay, because we don't like them to begin with. But the Democratic Party really looks up to people like Rob Reiner, who came out, I think it was tonight, and said, or earlier today on Twitter, and said that Biden needs to step down. Those are people who carry a lot of weight, those in the Democratic Party. And so I think that's huge. If more Hollywood figures start coming out, again, we don't care, but I think that Democrats care and liberals care. These are their cultural icons. These are the people who plow tens of millions of dollars into Democratic campaigns and coffers. So I think the Hollywood involvement at this stage is a very bad sign for Joe Biden. The question is, will we get more people in the coming days or fewer people coming out?
And I think it's important too, because it's not just name, weight, and notoriety that makes these people important. It's all of the closed door fundraisers. Like, this is a big fundraising problem too. That if you don't have all of these swanky, posh, invite only, $25,000 a head fundraisers hosted by people in Hollywood because they're jumping ship, that's going to be a problem for Biden and his campaign. Regardless of who put them up to it. Again, I don't know who. I'm not even going to speculate on that because I simply don't know. But that could pose a huge problem as well.
Yeah.
And do you have any other thoughts on that in particular? And,
no,
and what
I think it's going to be interesting there, what senators and what other people come out, but they're in a bind now because he didn't do poorly tonight. Of course, there were some gaffes and and he clearly was wasting a lot of time up there. But he didn't do poorly tonight, enough so that Democratic senators and congressmen are going to feel emboldened to come out in what amounts to an insurrection within the party. So they've got a real problem with his performance tonight. If he had been
I think so.
stellar, that would be good. They could say we're on board. If he had been horrible, it would be an avalanche. Right now, I don't know that they know what to do.
Well, and I think you and I were talking about this separate of this particular conversation. And I think, we kind of came to a conclusion in that conversation where he's just sane enough and not quite senile enough for them to be able to say, okay, time to go. Obviously, everyone agrees. I mean, he's just with it enough that he's actually far more dangerous, I think, than if he had completely lost it. Just aware enough to be able to continue to hang on and make it very difficult for the Democrats to deal with this problem. In the meantime, though, we get to sit on the sidelines with the popcorn and watch it all burn because, here we are in mid-July already. They should have this locked. They should be out there, utilizing whatever's left over of OFA, which is Obama's infamous electoral community organizing machine, Obama for America, that they then rolled into, I think, organizing for America was what it turned into after he won, which was also interesting too when Biden's talking about how no one has had a more organized campaign effort than what he has, given the machine that helped get him into the vice presidency to begin with. But I think it's going to be very interesting. And so to that end, Kamala Harris 2024. Do you have any initial thoughts outside of laughter on that? Because it is a very real possibility, it seems now. It's always been kind of looming in the background his entire presidency as we've watched him decline, and there have been calls for him to step down at various points throughout his presidency this time. But
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts about that and what that might look like?
Well, she is possibly the least serious candidate who may end up in the presidency. Uh, People used to make fun of Dan Quayle as a vice president because he had one or two slip ups and he was viewed as a lightweight, which was not true. I mean, I never met the guy, but from what I heard, he was actually very intelligent and very sharp. And but nobody's saying that about her. Okay, she has had a storied career. She's advanced, far farther than I think anybody reasonably could have expected. She's been in the right place at the right time, but she's just not a serious person. The giggling and the cackling and the repetition of weird phrases. And there's a reason why she dropped out of the primaries, even though she was much touted in 2020. I think even before the California vote, because she was going to get clobbered in her home state. So,
Yes.
will that change? To some extent, it will change because there's an anti-Trump vote. Okay. And in a primary, they're not voting against Trump, they're voting against or with other Democrats. So there will be a significant portion of the population who will say, we don't care if she, reminds us of like middle school giggly girls. As long as it's not Trump, I'd vote for anybody. And so I think there is a huge vote out there. But I can't see why she would do better in a national general election than she would have done in the Democrat primaries.
I completely agree. I mean, it's a little bit terrifying. In some ways, she checks all of the DEI boxes that they love to put on applications, but at the same time, I mean, if we're doing an IQ test here, I mean, to be charitable, I think we're all in a heap of trouble if she were to be taken seriously, because I'm not sure. I'm not. What I haven't been able to gauge yet is how many people are still so hardcore anti-Trump that they would vote for the likes of Harris. Um, just to avoid a Trump presidency. Because one of the things that I think, and I mean, we saw this with Jimmy Carter, you can have the best campaign slogans. You can be the most, what not that I'm saying he's probably not the best example for what I'm trying to paint here. But when people look at their bank accounts, that's going to speak louder than most campaign slogans, any promises that these people have made. Because like we talked about before, we know what Biden has done. We have an entire term in which to gauge his performance. And it's the same with Trump. So promises mean nothing. We know what we're getting, to a large extent. And so, go ahead.
I think there's a huge anti-Trump vote out there. I see it all the time. I hear it. I see it on Facebook. People are completely irrational. After the debate, I saw people saying they were crying and they fear for the nation. And I can't remember what it is. The women with the hoods on that were,
Yeah,
you know what I'm
screaming
I
into the
can't
air.
remember. Yeah,
It was when
and
Hillary
so I mean
lost,
they
right?
yeah, I mean they are I mean Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing, okay? And we tend to live in a bit of a bubble where people may not have been for Trump in the primaries, they might have been for someone else, but most of the people in our orbit will say, okay, it's now a binary choice, and I'm going to choose Trump over Biden. But there's another world, another universe where people say just the opposite. I don't care if he's in a coma. I don't care if he doesn't have a sentient thought in his head, that I'm going to vote for anybody who's not Donald Trump. And we should not underestimate that. Whether it's 45% of the population or 47% of the population or whatever it is, they are completely unpersuadable. And so,
I completely
I
agree.
could not rule out Kamala Harris, winning a presidential election. It's not impossible.
Lord help us. No, I completely agree. I mean, I'm further insulated, which is why I do like to get out occasionally because I live in rural Texas. Why I
Yeah.
see zero opposition where I am. Like there have been Trump 2024 signs since the day after the Trump lost the 2020 election. So, I mean, the landscape here is definitely different than the Northeast, and people talk about things very differently down here than they do in other parts of the country too, which is part of what makes prognosticating on all of these things very challenging. And I think one of the things that's made recent elections even more interesting, if you can use that word, and challenging to even talk about, and I've seen this just in my political career lifetime, is that polls as we know them they're not gauging people the same way they used to. We saw this in the 2016 election, how there was a huge crossover between Bernie and Trump supporters, and they were both bringing into their respective folds people who had never in their entire lives, I mean, these are people in their 50s and 60s, had never voted in a presidential election because they never felt like there was a candidate that spoke to them. But somehow Bernie and Trump, they believed, whether they fell on one side or the other, they tended to, there were many people who liked them both. They felt like these were people who spoke for them. So we've had a major realignment, a political realignment from what was once traditionally Republican and traditionally Democrat. And I don't think that the political establishment continues to account for that. I don't think they write to people that way. I don't think they poll people that way. And so I think that's I think it's a huge reason why the polling data continues to look so skewed, is not necessarily because the polls are wrong, but I don't think they're asking the right people the right questions, if that makes sense. So I'm curious to see, with Trump's third run, what all of this is going to look like. A little bit terrified, but I think it'll be interesting. Um, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the SAVE Act, which is, at least for me, pretty pathetic that we even have to have this discussion. And it's the Republican effort to try and stop all of the illegals that have been allowed into the country via the southern border and other means from being able to vote in our election. So, do you have any initial thoughts on that?
Well, it's not going to get past Biden. I think it was a good electoral move for Republicans to do. It did barely pass the House. And so, in congressional campaigns around the country, that's going to be something people who voted against it, Democrats who voted against it, that will be used against them. Because I think
Yeah.
most people understand our voting should be for US citizens, not for whoever happened to cross the border, 30 days ago. And so I it's not going to happen. I'm sure Chuck Schumer is going to do everything in his power to not even have it come to a vote in the Senate. And if for some reason it came to a vote in the Senate and it squeaked by, I think that Biden has already announced he'll veto it. So, it was one of those things that every party does. They bring up they bring up legislation in order, knowing it won't get through, in order to use it against opponents. So to that extent, I think it was probably a good endeavor.
Yeah, it's a ceremonial vote, and it's purely for talking points, and like you said, talking points and sound bites, so that it can be used at home, in town halls, and on flyers that get stuck in people's doorknobs and that kind of thing. So, I think you're absolutely right about that. And one of the last things I want to talk about is Chuck Schumer working on a bill to stop Trump's immunity. I know this is something you have written about a lot, you have talked about a lot. Um, can you share with us a little bit what your thoughts are on that and whether or not he has a chance of being able to succeed?
Well, he has no chance of being able to succeed. I forget what article and clause it is in the Constitution, but it prohibits
Article
bills
1,
of
Section
attainder.
9, Clause 3.
Thank
That's what
you.
you
I'm
wrote.
glad you have to know. I'm never good at that. You cannot have bills of attainder, which means a legislation targeting a single person. They might be able to get around that, but not if it's going to apply retroactively. And you can't have ex post facto laws. You can't make something illegal retroactively. And so if Trump had immunity when the acts were committed, and the Supreme Court has held that at varying levels from absolute immunity to, presumptive to none. But if he had immunity at the time the acts were committed, you can't go back in time. There's no legal time machine that, at least in our country, allows you to convict people of crimes that weren't crimes at the time of the conduct. Or in this case, it's a little different because it would be immunity of holding somebody not immune, even though at the time they were immune, but we're going to change that retroactively. So I think it's got no chance of ultimately succeeding. But much like the legislation we were just talking about, that's not why it's being done. It's being done because the Democrats have decided that they're going to try to burn down the Supreme Court. If they can't
Right.
control it, which they can't, they'll burn it down. And this is part of the
They
campaign to
can't
burn
pack
down the
it, which
Supreme Court.
is, yeah, they can't pack it. They tried to do that years ago, um, or said they would. So, no, I think you're 100% correct. They don't, it reminds me of, like, truthfully, of children who don't like being told no. It's like, well, fine. You won't let me have the toy. I'm going to break the toy so no one can have it. It's the same attitude, truly. Um, so, but I think, do you have any parting thoughts on any of the things that we discussed tonight?
No, I do think Republicans, Professor Glenn Reynolds from Instapundit Pundit has a phrase he often puts on his website, which is "Don't get cocky." And I'm seeing a little bit of irrational exuberance, okay, on the Republican side because of Biden's abysmal debate performance, which was a game changer in many ways. But it's just the middle of July now, okay? Biden was right tonight at the press conference. There is a long, long way to go. I'm not sure that's in Biden's favor because it just gives him more chance to have freezes and prove he's not capable. But there is a long way to go. I'm not convinced that we have anything near the ground game that the Democrats have. I think they are going to kill the Republicans on mail-in ballots and things like that, just like they've done in the past. I don't think we're half as organized. The Republicans, I should say, are half as organized as the Democrats. And so don't get cocky, people. It's only the middle of July. There's a lot that can change between now and the first week in November. And I think that, yes, would you rather be in Donald Trump's shoes right now than Joe Biden's? Yes, of course. Look at the polling. Look at how the media, Democrats are turning on him. But there's a long way to go.
I completely agree. I mean, because it's not over until it's over. I am looking forward to the Democratic convention because we saw how they screwed Bernie over in favor of Hillary in 2016. So who knows how that's going to shake out, because even in political terms, that's a month away. That's an eternity from now. So
And
I'm curious.
that's a huge advantage for the Democrats. I don't like this idea that there's a month between the conventions. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I always used to remember they were relatively close in time, the Democrat and
I
the
thought so
Republican
too.
convention. And this is a month apart. That gives the Democrats a lot of time to get their act together. And normally a convention is bashing the other candidate. I mean, that's a big part of it. And who are we going to bash? I guess both Biden and
Just
Harris,
in case, let's cover both bases.
and
Yeah.
but not really knowing who your opponent is going to be, I think is a disadvantage for the Republicans.
I
And
completely
you
agree.
know,
I completely agree,
so
because anything you hope you might get from it might be completely and totally void here in a month if they end up, going with someone different after all for their nominee. So, and I'm with you. It's not over until it's over, and it is far from over. And between the middle of July, I mean, if August is a political eternity away, and I apologize, I have a chicken named Karen who's out there and has got the whole block stirred up. It's very noisy in here. Um, but as much as there is, and she's
so
Karen
those are
for a
your
reason.
chickens. Those are your
Yes.
chickens. That's not your kids.
No, for once, no, it's the chickens. And they're congregating. In the hurricane, there was some damage to their little house and to their fencing, and so now they're all right up close and personal, which is just so fun. So, but as far as August is away in terms of being a political eternity, November is so much further. I mean, that might as well be years away at this juncture. We have so far to go, and so. And I know after, I spent some time working as a grassroots activist on the right, we have nothing compared to what the left has. Nothing at all. And for the life of me, I don't understand, with all the technology, with all the money, with all the everything, why the right hasn't, and why the Republican Party itself hasn't better figured this out and better mobilized. I mean, I think if I have an answer for the question that I just posed, I think it's probably simply that culturally Republicans are not the same. They don't really want to engage. They want to vote and go home and be left alone for the most part. They don't want to be compelled to do all of these things to make change. They just want to sit at home and be left alone and mind their own business and continue doing what they're doing, which I fully 100% support, except that's not how our opponent fights. And at some point, we need to realize that. So, but I want to thank everyone for joining us with this episode. If you'd like to find this podcast on our website, go to legalinsurrection.com/2. And we hope you enjoyed this. We had a good time, and we look forward to chatting again next week. Thank you.